Polite notice. Ed Pawncroft and his associates would like to apologize for the noticeable whirring noise in the background of this exciting tale. Due to the outbreak of the coronavirus, which I'm sure you've all noticed, I have been forced to retreat into my 26-foot-deep, 7-inch lead-lined bunker, or I shall surely perish. The sound is that of my giant extractor fan, without which I would surely suffocate, and you would not be able to enjoy my baritone smooth voice. That is all for now. Milton's Adventure, a Milton story, narrated by Ed Pawncroft. Chapter 8, The Meat Realm Menace. Milton peered down over the edge of the space freighter. He could vaguely make out a vast, rocky continent that occasionally peeked through gaps in the layer of wispy cloud below him. He had been waiting atop the airborne vessel for quite some time now, ever since appearing through the giant gummy zone warp portal that had taken him from deep space near the Ed's Burger restaurant to here. But where here was, he could not say. It was exceptionally chilly, and Milton's teeth began to chatter. His orange superpowers had all but vanished by now, leaving him weak and exhausted. He looked down at the motionless corpse of the luchador demon El Frijoles Grandes, his tongue lolling from the side of his big thin mouth, and his rigor mortis-induced hand still clawing at the giant hole Milton had punched through his chest. He rummaged around in his brimming Attack on Titan backpack, pulling out the bloodstone chalice. As soon as he did, the glass began to absorb the essence of the vanquished demon, a wispy trail of white energy seeping out from the body and filling up the little glass with the familiar fizzy orange brew. Milton shivered as he clutched the glass, bringing it to his chapped lips and taking a sip. That's the good stuff. He calmly drank the rest of the drink as the body of El Frijoles faded away slowly into the netherworld, or, more specifically, the demon pen in the pucker realm. Milton tried for a belch, but instead regurgitated some fizz at the back of his throat, and thought better than to try again. He took a glance over the side of the freighter. Just where was he heading? The landmass below offered no landmarks or structures of note, being for the most part completely barren. Milton breathed in long and hard through his nose, detecting a faint odour of grilled meat, like someone was frying a steak 100 miles away, or a kebab van had been there a few weeks ago. The smell was good, but reminded Milton of how hungry he was, having had his stomach completely emptied a few dozen times during the belt-busting burger challenge. He snacked on a handful of purple beans stolen from the Ed's Burger kitchen as he pondered his next move. If he could find a door, then he would be able to space transmutate and get back home and safe for a well-earned bit of rest. He concluded that his best bet would be to continue making his way along the containers until he reached the freighter's cockpit. There would surely be some answers for him there. Milton trudged his way along the lengthy cargo ship. The wind resistance was high, and his bag was heavy, but he kept on. Eventually, the end seemed to be in sight. Milton hopped from the final container and landed on the frontal portion of the space vehicle, a robust driver's cabin with an entry hatch on the top. He edged carefully along the metal roof, attempting to make as little sound as possible while also maintaining balance so as not to plummet through the clouds below. "Bird, get this hatch open. Let's see what's inside." The bird silently obliged and sprang forth, its little wings flapping quickly against the strong winds. One beam of light later, and the hatch was blasted open. Milton crouched and peered within, detecting no sign of any pilot. Perhaps it was a drone ship, or one of those ships where the driver can just have a nap while it flies itself. Dearly wanting to get out of the cold, Milton jumped down the hatch to land with a thud in the cockpit cabin. "Hey, this is pretty cushy." Milton looked around, admiring the upholstery. Everything color-coordinated loosely with the interior of the Ed's Burger restaurant. He took a seat in one of the big blue chairs situated in front of the curved windshield and put his feet up on the control panel. A click came from behind his head, followed by some kind of revolting alien exclamation. Milton swallowed, raising his hands. He'd been rumbled. Just passing through." Another vile sound came from behind, and he could feel the end of a weapon pressed against his neck.
"Let's just talk this through."
Milton waited a few long seconds, then spun around in the chair, disarming the weedy tannoid pilot behind him with a haphazard karate chop. Hi-ya! The space blaster it wielded clattered to the ground, and Milton swooped in, picking it up and pointing it back at the alarmed reptilian. "Gloves on the other hand now, huh? Now just turn this thing around and get me back through that magic hole," spat Milton fiercely. The tannoid backed away, its scaly hands raised high. "Not one for talking, eh? Well, it'll be easier to speak when you're dead." Milton fired a laser round at the tannoid, but the agile gecko sprang out of the way and made for the control panel, likely in an attempt to send off some kind of distress signal. Milton could not have that, and shot another bout of energy. This time he hit, and the tannoid was sent crashing into the control panel, a big fizzling hole in its skull. Instantly, a loud whining alarm began to blare around the cabin, accompanied by flashing red lights. "Uh-oh," said Milton, sensing imminent catastrophe. The ship began to judder and quake beneath his feet, and the corpse of the tannoid started to roll across the cabin floor. He ran to the windscreen to see the clouds in front, slowly tipping to the side.
"This place is gonna blow!"
The freighter was indeed destined to crash, to plunge down onto the land below and implode into a smouldering wreckage. Milton clung to the chair as the ship continued to upend. Through a window to his right, he saw one of the immense storage containers detach and topple from the vehicle to fall through the skies down towards what looked like some kind of port. The freighter continued its perilous descent in the direction of some forested mountains ahead.
"Bird, help me! Is there anything you can do?"
screamed Milton over the sirens and the groaning of the ship's inner workings. The bird shot forth and flitted around the cabin.
"Is there any way to get this thing back on its flight path?"
The bird continued to scan the room, but to no avail. The ship was simply scuppered. Milton clung to the chair and gritted his teeth as the mountains passed by below, visible through the right-hand window that was now underneath him.
"Guess we're just gonna have to brace for a bumpy landing then!"
When Milton opened his eyes, he was in a field, surrounded by flaming debris. He didn't remember passing out, but was thankful he'd even woken up at all. The air around him was warm, and still carried the same meaty waft, reinvigorating Milton's yearn for a hot, square meal. Milton scrambled to his feet amongst the fiery destruction. A protective white force field shimmered around him, having saved him from the rough landing.
"Wow, Bird! I didn't know you could do that. Would have maybe been useful a couple of times before."
The magical barrier flickered from existence, and the exhausted bird returned to Milton's backpack. Milton scrambled through the hot wreckage and away from the giant trench of destruction that the crashed freighter had carved into the land. He adjusted his backpack straps and brushed the hair out of his eyes. It was time to get moving and find a door, then get the heck out of there. Milton travelled north across the open plains, towards a range of misty pine-covered mountains up ahead. He could not explain why, but this seemed to be the place to go. The surrounding landscape was familiar, yet Milton could tell he was not on Earth. While he walked, he noticed numerous things that tipped him off to this fact. A flock of large birds, which seemed to possess thick woolen coats and simian-like extremities, soared overhead in front of the sun, a slightly larger sun than he was used to seeing, and a couple of shades redder too. Its position was pretty low in the sky, and because of the mildew on the grass, Milton determined it to be the early hours of the morning. What he did not expect to see, as he walked through the tall, glistening grass blades, was a long, shimmering fish flopping around on its side, seemingly grazing for food. But despite these jarring irregularities, the place wasn't too different from the halcyon pastures of his home planet, a welcome change after the totally alien Ed's burger. The weather was warm, with a light breeze that carried the ever-present meat scent, a pleasingly relaxing atmosphere to Milton. At one point, he bent to inspect a patch of fragrant flowers, discovering them to have what appeared to be a rolled-up slice of ham growing protrusively from in between its rose-pink petals. He checked the rest of the patch and concluded it to be a botanical trait, plucking the curled ham and gently nibbling it. The flavour held intense umami tones, and Milton found the whole flower disappearing into his mouth in seconds. He picked the rest of the crop and tucked them into his pocket for a quick trail snack while he trudged through the grassy valley. Milton continued this way for some 20 minutes before a low rumbling came from the ground beneath his feet. An earthquake? Milton dropped to the ground and braced for impact, but the rumbling got louder and closer until he felt as though the ground were about to break open and swallow him whole. Something passed quickly in front, a beast of some kind, then another, and another, then an entire herd of the fleeing creatures.
"A stampede!"
said Milton aloud as he was encompassed in a cloud of dust. Thankfully, he wasn't in the creature's path, or he would surely have been flattened. He got to his feet to get a better look at the passing beings, bovine in nature, but with the head of a chicken? Milton squinted to check again. Indeed, he was correct. The cattle-like animals possessed the distinctive beak, comb, and wattle of Earth's own domesticated fowl, combined with the body and legs of the common cow. A chow, if you will. Milton was horrified. Just what kind of Dr. Frankenstein-inspired domain was this, where such mutant horrors were free to roam around? The herd passed, and the dust settled. Milton scratched his head, then sauntered forth.
Well, time to keep on going.
No sooner had he begun walking that the rumble started up again, this time much slower and deeper, as though whatever was making the noise were twice as big. Milton looked in the direction which the chows had been fleeing, and saw something he wished he hadn't. An immense 40-foot man was bounding straight for him, shaking the ground below with every huge step it took. It was stark naked, and its body was stocky and round, with short, stubby limbs. The beast had no neck, its face located near the top of its vast torso, boasting 2 football-sized eyes, both glowing bright green. Milton turned and bolted as the shape of the huge man blotted out the sun and plunged him into shadow, a huge groan emanating from its mouth that caused the hair on Milton's arms to stand on end and his bowels to loosen. Of course the herd had to be running from something. How could he be so naive? Milton attempted to run to the left and out from the shadow, but the giant was fixated on him now and was close behind. Milton dared to look behind, seeing that the monstrous behemoth was nearly upon him, outstretched hands as wide as a bus. Milton stumbled on a clod of grass and collapsed into the ground, dazed and prone. The giant lumbered forth and bent to pick him up. Who knew what it was going to do next? Eat him? Tear him into little strips? Or worse? Milton winced.
Now would be a great time for that magic barrier again, bird.
But no magic barrier came. Milton was scooped up in the giant's hand and dangled perilously above its wide-open mouth. Milton saw that the titan's teeth were lined with the flesh and gristle of hundreds of wildebeests, and within seconds he too would be assigned to the same bloody fate. But Milton saw that there was something else to this beast, something in its empty green eyes. There was a sudden noise like a dart hitting a board, followed by a grunt from the giant. The grip around Milton was loosened. Slowly, the beast swayed and toppled to the ground with a resonant thud. A harpoon the length of a telegraph pole was stuck fast in the giant's back, and coming up behind was, unmistakably, a patrol of regular-sized men on horseback. "Oh, I'm saved!" cried Milton, rolling out from between the limp fingers of the giant. As the squadron of figures drew closer, Milton realized he was mistaken. These men were not on horseback, but straddling large winged lizards. "Dragons!" gasped Milton. "Halt!" came a voice from the front of the pack, as they stopped to notice the adolescent boy crawling on his elbows away from the felled colossus. "Who goes there?" Milton coughed into the dirt as the group of 4 dragon riders advanced to stand over him. Milton looked up. They certainly weren't space aliens, but they did look like they belonged in some kind of epic fantasy movie, with metal pauldrons and layers of chainmail to boot. The man sitting on the foremost dragon was stony-faced, with a dark chin-strap beard and bushy eyebrows. He wore a set of shining silver armor, and a helmet that bore a crest of curved spikes, indented with an intricate weaving pattern. He wielded a long spear ending in a curved scimitar-like blade, which was pointed rather menacingly at Milton. "Speak, peasant!" barked the silver warrior. "Surely I need not remind you that you are in the presence of I, Prince Rumpus Mannaham, first in line to the throne of Creus." Milton rose to his feet and brushed the dust from himself.
"Prince Rumpus what? Sorry, but I don't think I'll ever remember a name like that."
The warrior known as Rumpus turned to one of his men. "Likely a simpleton. Either that or he's suffered some kind of cranial damage." The man, who seemed rather intimidated by his leader, nodded, and Rumpus turned back to face Milton, frowning in disgust. "Then you may simply address me as sire. You may now bow and impart your own title." Milton looked up at his saviours, specifically the long, sharp weapons they held, and offered the best bow he could muster.
Yes, sire. My name is Mintal, and I'm a travelling trader.
Prince Rumpus pulled at the reins of his dragon steed, which exuded a puff of smoke, and circled Milton. Strange. You bear not the traditional traveller's greaves or cuirass. What business have you out here in the uncharted regions, and how have you ended up in the grip of a giant of Karnus? Milton sniffed.
I come from a faraway land, but I bring gifts to trade.
Milton began to remove his backpack, but was startled by a sudden explosion of anger from the prince.
Do not lie to me, traveller. You are no trader, and you are certainly not of the meat realm.
The meat realm?
Repeated Milton. The name sounded familiar. Milton was suddenly brought straight back to the eating competition from a few hours before. Hadn't the Forever Burger originated from the meat realm? Milton suddenly felt quite sick indeed.
You know not of the ground you stand on? Then that makes you a trespasser, and a threat to the security of these lands. Men, seize him!
The other 3 patrolmen advanced with spears at the ready.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Easy up there, Captain!
Cried Milton, backing away with his hands raised.
I'm no threat, honestly!
He turned to look at the fell giant, which was still breathing slowly, having been tranquilized by Rumpus and his men.
In fact, I can help you!
Rumpus spat at the ground.
You are no help to us, Trader Mintal. I suspect you are a spy sent by the renegade heretics.
I'm not. I promise. Look, I helped you kill that giant, didn't I?
I wouldn't say helped. More slowed down,
Milton continued.
And I bet there are more of them, right? Let me guess. They're wreaking havoc upon the lands or something like that.
Rumpus stroked his fine black beard.
Well, only as of recently. The giants of Karnus are typically a peaceful race that rarely stray from the lands of Karnus beyond yonder mountains, but something seems to have gotten into them of late.
Milton clapped his hands.
Yes! Sire Rumpus, I've got to tell you now. I saw something in the giant's eyes as it was about to eat me up. A green fury. If I'm not mistaken, the foul clutches of the demon Krog have reached these lands.
Prince Rumpus and his men exchanged glances, shrugging in confusion. Rumpus turned back, shaking his head in denial.
Nope, I know nothing of this demon Krog. Do continue.
I knew I felt it,
continued Milton, pointing to the misty mountain ahead.
The energy is coming from there. I know it to be so. If you just don't arrest me and let me accompany you, I'm sure we can slay it together and bring order back to these lands.
The sides of Rumpus's mouth curled into a smile.
Perhaps you are a trader after all, Mintal, for I have not seen bargaining such as this since my travels to the ancient bazaars of Egypt. I will take you to our capital, Creus, and we will discuss this further.
Milton frowned.
But the mountain is right there, sire. I'm telling you, there's probably a demon inside it. Don't you want to slay it now?
Such matters are to be taken up with my father, King Karnus. You will make your plea to him, if it is indeed of the utmost importance. And one more thing. Please refrain from consuming our protected wildlife. Rumpus indicated the ham flowers tucked into Milton's pocket. If you are hungry, may I offer this? Rumpus produced a pouch of jerky meat, leaning over his dragon mount to pass the sealed nourishment to Milton, who ditched the meaty flowers and tore into the packet eagerly. Rumpus grinned. Beware, Trader Mintal. Once you taste Creus capital biltong, you will not go back to regular meats. Milton inspected the thick slither of dark meat. It certainly didn't look any different from your regular Jack Link's jerky, or anything else from the store. Milton bit into the chewy cured meat, and his taste buds were immediately punched in the face. Milton's eyes widened, gnashing on the meaty morsel.
This stuff is great. Got any more?
There's plenty more in the city, Mintal. In fact, if you're looking for meat, then you have come to the best place for it. Now, let us ride for Creus. At the behest of Prince Rumpus, Milton mounted his dragon, where he sat on the beast's neck in front of the prince's own saddle, while the other patrolmen went about tying and fastening the giant of Karnus into a great rope and net.
What's with these dragons, then? Can they fly?
Inquired Milton, stroking the creature's emerald green scales. Can they fly? What a pathetic question! Of course they fly! Rumpus tugged at his reins, and the flying lizard took off about 20 foot into the air. Milton whooped and cheered as they glided along across riverbanks and estuaries, passing over hamflower paddocks and more herds of grazing chows. Behind them, the giant was lifted up off the ground and carried between the 3 dragon riders, who flew in a formation that kept it wrapped up as though it were in a giant hammock. The dragons themselves seemed none too pleased, the enormous heft of the giant putting great strain on their wiry bodies. Milton spoke over the rush of wind. "So is everything around here meat-based?" "It depends what you mean by such a question. Is every life form not formed of meat?" Milton squinted as they passed an outcrop of rocks faintly resembling a sirloin steak. "Okay, so what about you? You don't look much different from me." "We are meat realm humans, Karnus sapiens. In theory, we are almost identical to persons from any other realm, but cut us open and you'll find that we bleed mincemeat." "No way!" cried Milton. "So you mean there's literally little tiny bits of meat running through your veins?" "No more questions until we reach the capital," ordered Rumpus, swerving to avoid a diving woolly bird. Rumpus leaned forward and addressed Milton in a low register. "Let it be known that the only reason you have been spared from imprisonment on this day is because of your utterance of the name Krag. For here in the meat realm, that name is a secret to all but my family. Speak it again in such company, and I will not hesitate to strike you down where you stand." The next hour of the journey was passed in silence, with Milton too intimidated by the prince's threats to speak at all. He looked solemnly to his left, where the mountain range could be seen far off in the distance. He felt that this was where he should be, and he had half a mind to grab the reins from Rumpus and turn back around. He'd beaten 6 demons, for goodness sake. Why was he so afraid of some man in a bit of shiny armour? Rumpus interrupted his train of thought. "Hold on tight, Trader Mintol. We are taking a shortcut." The dragon's flight path arched upwards dramatically, and Milton felt the chill of the clouds enclose around him once again as he held on for dear life. Through the puffy white cumulus ahead, Milton could just make out a strange flickering surface, refracting the light around it and bouncing off it in lots of pretty colours. It was unmistakably a hole in space-time, another, much tinier, gummy zone warp point. Evidently, the meat realm did not hold back when it came to interdimensional travel. Rumpus yelled over the harsh gusts, "This portal will transpose us directly above the capital, a journey that would normally take 5 days." Within seconds, they had disappeared through the gash in the sky, which was just big enough to fit the 4 dragons and the giant. When the assault of multicoloured chaos that he had become accustomed to passed, his eyes were treated to a sight to behold. An immense city lay below him, far bigger than any he could recall, and taller too, with hundreds of towers that touched the clouds. It seemed to have no end, spreading out in all directions towards ports, lakes, mountains and plains, encircled by a crude shantytown around its outskirts, in stark contrast to the grand manors and villas everywhere else. There was no point in any direction where he could see an end to the monstrous megapolis. As the dragons flew overhead, Milton saw weaving roads, networks of bustling high streets, huge cathedrals, ancient temples, and vibrant marketplaces. He saw that the city was separated into 3 districts, each encompassed by a huge wall lined high with gigantic sharp blades. Milton could vaguely make out a point in the outermost wall which looked like it had been recently destroyed, but thought nothing of it. In the centremost and highest of the 3 districts was a monumental castle consisting of many high towers, most ending in curved sharp spires. Impaled on the ends of these points were giant chunks of meat matter, which combined probably made up enough meat to rival the Edsberger comet. The dragons flew towards a large open balcony, weaving between the spires which exuded heat and dripped gravy as they passed. Milton hypothesized that they were perhaps being cooked by the sun like some kind of giant sizzling kebab, and licked his lips. This really was the realm of meat. The fleet of 4 dragons dipped down to make a landing on an immense balcony, situated at the top of a soaring tower that dwarfed the cityscape below. The overburdened dragons could not take the strain for a moment longer, and the giant of Dernis was unceremoniously dumped onto the great shelf. Rumpus and his soldiers dismounted their weary steeds, and Milton followed suit, as the beasts were led off by more similarly clad guards. The prince addressed the tallest of his 3 men. "Grillion, take the beast to the vaults and have it observed." The soldier obeyed, and the limp giant was dragged off across the flagstones.
A tall, sombre man in flowing magenta robes approached the party and bowed low to Rumpus.
"My prince, the king would see you at once."
Rumpus removed his helmet and swept aside his fine black hair, frowning. "What has transpired, Grand Steward Rodnox?" The Steward Rodnox, who was quite old and possessed a wispy white beard and floppy cap that looked vaguely like a ham hock, bowed again.
"One of our trading ships was brought down a matter of hours ago. His meatiness believes it may be another coordinated attack from the rebel insurgents."
Milton looked away, pretending not to hear, but was noticed by the old man.
"My prince, who is this that accompanies you to the royal palace?"
Rumpus patted Milton on the head.
"This is Mintol. My men and I encountered him out in Dernis country and saved him from a giant attack. He believes he knows how to prevent any further run-ins with the big folk."
The steward cocked his head, confused. Milton coughed and spoke up. "It's coming from that mountain range." Milton pointed back in the loose direction of the Dernis range. "I believe, my liege," added Milton.
Rumpus addressed the old man. "Grand Steward, give Mintol a tour of the palace, then bring him to the court, where he shall speak before the king."
Rodnox bowed deeper than ever before.
"But my prince, the royal feast is set to begin upon 1/2 of the hour. The king celebrates the capture of a traitor."
"All the better," nodded Rumpus. "Mintol will experience the best tastes and smells that our kingdom has to offer."
Rumpus turned to glance at Milton.
"And keep his mouth sealed."
And with that the prince departed into the palace, leaving Milton alone with the Grand Steward. The old man turned to face Milton.
"Very well, if you would follow me."
Milton was escorted down a grand flight of stairs at the back half of the veranda, which opened out into a great hall, the walls of which were embellished with opulent purple banners and flags. The royal crest was present on each, depicting a two-pronged fork surrounded by more symbols and icons. Quickly, Milton's eyes were drawn to several more swirling rainbow portals, akin to the one the freighter had passed through, but much smaller in nature, and surrounded by elaborate runed frames.
Gummy's own warp points!
Rodnox nodded gracefully.
"You now stand in the Hall of Space Transmutiny, near the top of the God's Tower, the highest tower of the Kraus Royal Palace. These 6 portals lead to each of the other areas."
You mean I can get back to Earth?
"Earth?"
chuckled Rodnox.
"Indeed, you can return back to reality, although I'm not sure why you would want to go back to that dismal place."
Milton paid no heed to the jab at his homeworld, as he was already engrossed in staring at the illustrious paintings, murals, and tapestries lining the walls.
"Ah, I see you are admiring the royal works of art. These show scenes of importance in Meat Realm history. For example, the slaying of the mighty Huragog."
Rodnox indicated a tapestry of many Meat Realmians atop a colossal porcine beast, at least 5 times as big as the giant of Dernis.
"It is the flesh of this great beast that you see impaled upon the tower's spires to this day. It was often said that the meat would be enough to feed an army. Who knew it would be enough to feed 7 generations?
Rodnox let out a dry, raspy laugh, then gesticulated towards a huge oil painting in a golden frame.
"This work depicts the incumbent King Karnus signing a treaty of peace with the beef-eaters of the far northern Badlands."
Milton stared up at the huge painting, which illustrated the king standing imposingly on a rock, surrounded by a circle of genuflecting dark-skinned people. He was at least twice their height, and was drawn with a flowing black beard and furious eyes. Milton swallowed. He'd hate to get on that guy's bad side. The Grand Steward led Milton to the back of the hall, towards a booth in a shaft.
"Step within the vestibule of vertical displacement, and we shall travel down the tower."
Milton obliged and followed Rodnox within. Sliding glass doors closed behind them, and Rodnox pressed a button, which emitted a low chime.
So it's a lift?
"In layman's terms, yes,"
frowned Rodnox as the royal elevator travelled smoothly downward.
"If you look ahead now, you will be afforded a view into the Royal Armory and Barracks."
Milton did so, and beheld another gigantic open hall, filled with many machines of war, catapults and trebuchets, as well as more high-tech contraptions Milton could not place. More royal soldiers, sporting armour similar to Prince Rumpus, trained and sparred, while armoured dragons far larger than the ones ridden by the prince lay in metal cages along the edges of the great hall, smoke billowing from their nostrils. The elevator passed downward, and Milton's eyes bulged at the sight of hoards and piles of treasure. Gold, silver, and other precious metals amassed throughout another, even larger chamber. Rodnox cleared his throat.
The Royal Treasury, naturally.
Noblemen and dignitaries with robes of many colours perused overflowing chests of treasure and skulls and skeletons of immense beasts, treating the collection as though it were the most prestigious of museums.
Here is held the entire royal collection, spanning thousands of years of accumulation. Some artifacts even date back to the early pre-Carnozoic era, chiefly that bucket of time over yonder, and that clay figure of an engorged phallus.
"What's that at the back?" questioned Milton, pressing his finger against the glass at a magical force field-surrounded artifact.
That is the keystone of our realm, the fork of the forest. It is under maximum security. Not even the hardiest of thieves can penetrate the spell barrier.
Milton thought back to what Jamie had once said about the chalice being the keystone between reality and the pucker realm. Evidently there were more artifacts which bridged the gaps between the other areas. The elevator passed down through a long open-air section, allowing Milton an exceptional view of the castle's layout below.
Far below to your left, you can see the royal gardens.
Milton looked down to see a high-walled, well-tended garden that stretched on for miles, complete with fountains, parks, and miniature wooded biomes. Are those gorillas?" Milton gawped down at the great black apes in question, which were frolicking about and climbing in the tall jungle trees. "They don't look any different. I'd expect them to have the head of a centipede or something." Rodnox seemed insulted.
Do not be absurd, and refrain from talking in such a way about our realm's sacred animal. This is a place of sanctity. Now, in a moment, we shall pass by the royal fuck house, so avert your gaze if that sort of thing appalls you.
Rodnox turned and looked at the floor of the lift as they passed another giant chamber, in which many acts of hedonism and debauchery were taking place. Milton saw beautiful women dancing in cages, unclothed folk frolicking in pits of what looked like gravy, and even caught a fleeting glimpse of a man spreading his cheeks for the penetration of a large rock monster before they passed into the next chamber, a series of long halls with many doors along them. Rodnox turned back.
Ah, the royal living quarters. You will note the rooms of the king, queen, and all of his 5 progenies.
"Whose room is that?" asked Milton, pointing towards a charred and blasted hole, where a most grand room probably used to be. Rodnox shook his head stonily.
Alas, the king forbids any mention of his second-born son. Now, that concludes this brief iteration of the royal tour. We will now come to the hall of royal feasting, the single largest chamber in the entire palace. Within will be the king, his queen Mince Mannaham, and 2 of his aforementioned kin, the remaining 3 being out on expeditions of great import, or otherwise engaged.
The lift came to a steady stop, and the glass doors parted. Milton was directed out into a vast dining hall, with rows and rows of banqueting tables that stretched all the way to the palace's splendourous walls, dotted with flaming sconces and many more fine draperies. Lords and ladies, dukes and duchesses, and noblemen and women filled the ornate chairs, ready to begin their royal feasting.
Here he is,
boomed a deep voice from the far end of the hall, drowning out the chatter of the noble folk. In a high throne at the head of the longest table sat King Karnus, monarch of the meat realm.
Our guest from another world.
Rodnox indicated for Milton to approach the throne, and he did so in silence, passing the extravagantly dressed Imperials, who looked on with reproach. Finally, Milton stood before the king, who sat slouched in his elaborate golden throne, clutching a sceptre that ended as though it were a 2-pronged pitchfork piercing a bratwurst. Upon his black locks sat a crown of gold, and from his square shoulders hung a long purple cape. He looked down at Milton with a mad glare and a wide smile, a wholly unreadable expression that was 5 times as unnerving as his depiction in the painting.
The chatter in the great hall resumed, yet the volume of the king's voice did not lower a great deal.
Mintle, my firstborn Rumpus informs me that you know how to rid the lands of Durnus of this curse that has been beset upon us.
Milton, who had already gotten down on one knee out of habit, nodded.
Indeed, your meatiness.
He caught sight of Rumpus sitting in an adjacent throne, looking on stoically. The king brandished his big sausage fork.
You are half Puccanese. I can see it in your veins.
Milton looked up.
You know of the Pucker realm?
I know a great many things,
bellowed the king.
I have travelled the 7 areas 100 times over. I have conquered the black cliffs of Symor. I have gazed upon the cosmic bungus with my very own eyes. I've even been to and returned with all my limbs still in the right places.
Milton looked uneasily at the two nearest thrones, which seated a tall, blonde, and astonishingly beautiful woman of middle age, evidently the queen, and another much younger prince, who shifted uncomfortably and reminded Milton a great deal of Craig. The king continued.
You say that Durnus has been tainted by...
The king paused as though remembering to refrain from voicing the name.
Great evil.
Milton nodded again.
Indeed so, my humble king. Evil from within the big mountain.
The king smashed the armrest of his throne loudly, causing the hall to fall silent once more.
Tomorrow we ride for the mountains of Durnus. But now we shall feast, for we celebrate the capture of one of our conspirators. Dig in, my people!
The hall burst into agreement, and merriment ensued. Serving men entered, pouring fine wine, and serving some of the most delicious meats Milton had ever laid eyes upon, completely distracting him from the matter of the evil mountain. Grand Steward Rodnox showed Milton to his seat.
You will sit between Baron Sillicus Fond of the Fond dynasty and his meatiness's second-born, Prince Spamley Mannaham.
Milton greeted both of his feasting neighbours as courteously as he could manage, and took his place. The fat baron leaned in towards Milton, laughing heartily.
This is my 3rd feast today!
Milton licked his lips and tucked one of the laced napkins into his orange and purple jumpsuit as a bib.
Wow, now this stuff looks great,
he proclaimed, eyeing up a dish of deep red steaming meat cutlets, and a tureen containing the severed head of a chow, stuffed with the head of one of the birds he had seen earlier, stuffed with a glazed landfish. The fat baron Sillicus Fond, who had rolled up his sleeves and was piling high his plate with ham-wrapped drumsticks and rashers of cured purple bacon, spoke with fervour.
Ah, such exquisite delights! Venison from the Vale of Veal, sealed swordfish steak from, the Fish Finger Lake, and is that, chicken breast from the chicken farm. Oh, his meatiness spoils us so.
Milton cautiously stabbed a slice of meat with his silver fork and took a little bite. An orgasmic dump truck of otherworldly flavours was unloaded onto his tongue, the taste of the most delicious meats on earth combined all at once. He needed more. Milton stood up to load his plate with roasted potato cakes, spam fritters, and dripping glazed ribs. Getting perhaps a tad overexcited, he reached over to grope at a beautiful ceramic gravy boat, accidentally upending a goblet of purple wine onto Prince Spamley, whose pantaloons were instantly soaked through.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry,
said Milton, attempting to control the spillage with his napkin, before several waiting persons arrived on scene with embroidered towels to correctly soak it up.
No, it's quite all right,
sighed the young prince. King Karnus, who watched from his high throne gnawing on the leg of a boar, growled angrily at his youngest son.
Boy, do not make a scene!
Spamley looked down at the table meekly, as his father returned to his aggressive feasting. Milton talked in a low tone to the young man, who could not have been more than a few years older than he, through mouthfuls of meat.
You okay, dude?
Spamley prodded at his plate, upon which lay a small solitary meat pie.
No, I am fearful of my father,
he said in a quiet voice. Milton snapped the joint of a pheasant thigh.
Why? What's he done?
I'm not sure I should be telling you, but he grows more and more agitated each day. Well, because of the rebel uprising.
An uprising?
A glob of gravy shot from Milton's mouth, landing on Spamley's cheek, causing the young prince to flinch.
What's all that about, then?
Spamley shifted uneasily.
They're a group of insurgents who revolt against the crown for its misdeeds against the capital populace. They call themselves the Burnt End. Their base of operations is unknown, yet they have already galvanized several attacks against the city.
Spamley leaned in.
I tell you this because I have lost trust in my father's kingdom. Already members of our own family and court have turned to their side, including my brother, the king's second eldest, who was banished when he—
Boy!
Bellowed the king, flinging his leg of meat into the air, where it landed in the queen's chowder broth bowl.
Cease your mutterings.
The feast continued, with Spamley not uttering another word, and silently picking away at his lone pie. Milton ate and ate until he could eat no more, when he sat back in his chair and patted his brimming midriff. Sure, this monarchy may be corrupt, but they sure served hella good food. After a short ceremony involving the sipping of a thick meaty bovril and a brief salutation to the palace's head chef, a stout rosy-cheeked man by the name of Lamb Chop Roy, the king stood to announce the following event.
We now witness something historic.
Baron Fond clapped his hands together in glee.
I hope it's as good as last week's post-feast event.
He turned to Milton.
A live performance from my favourite band, Talon and the Clack Boys, woohoo!
King Karnus raised his sceptre high into the air and brought it down as though it were a deadly weapon.
The execution of a terrorist.
The hall broke into cheer and applause. The fat baron next to Milton got to his feet in triumph, whooping riotously,
Yeah! A booyah!
The king signalled to his firstborn Rumpus, who bowed and stood up from his seat.
Indeed, some days ago we captured one of the foremost members of the mutinous group of fearmongers that call themselves the Burnt End. He is an evil mastermind, partly responsible for the attack and subsequent destruction of the third wall that surrounds our great city. Today he shall pay for his crimes.
The king stood again, raising his fists in the air.
My kinsman, to Annihilation Hall!
Milton followed the parade of noblemen across the grand terraces and high arches of the royal palace, the procession led by the king in a dragon-drawn carriage up front. A royal fanfare blared out over the walls of the citadel, and Milton saw the citizens of Creus far below cheering in reverence, for they knew what was about to take place. "Where are we going again?" asked Milton to Rodnox, who walked alongside him, as the parade filed through a high archway. Rodnox responded coldly, not turning to look at Milton.
To the Annihilation Hole, a place of sacrifice among our people. Those killed here are an offering to the meat gods who watch over these lands.
The parade filtered out into a vast Colosseum-like arena. Milton swallowed nervously. The last time he was in one of these, things hadn't exactly gone as planned. Milton followed Rodnox into a series of stone seats to the right, where he sat down next to the old steward and an obese yet well-dressed lady who smelled like prosciutto ham. Milton looked up to see that the clouds were swirling ominously above the roofless stadium. He then looked down into the centre of the Colosseum, which housed a gaping circular pit, which appeared to be bottomless, at least from where Milton was sitting. Milton looked around at the smiling, laughing Meat Realm dignitaries. Something wasn't right here at all. The king, now located at an altar on the far side of the Colosseum, stood up once more, his vociferous voice booming and bouncing about the arena.
Today, the terrorist known as Sal Lami is to be sacrificed to the Annihilation Hole, where he will rot eternally in the depths of purgatory, forced to feast on an endless patty formed from his own sins.
Milton pondered the similarity of this punishment to the belt-busting burger challenge, as a dishevelled, gruff-looking man of burly disposition was thrust from the dark doorway in the side of the arena, his arms tied and his clothes ragged. His head was shaved, except for a topknot, and he looked like he hadn't had a good night's sleep for a long while. Behind him was an exceptionally tall, long-limbed and sallow woman, sporting a tall pointed helmet and a long staff ending with a glinting purple crystal that she held to the captive's neck.
He will perish at the hands of our very own Strandel the Humiliator!
The tall woman known as Strandel waved her staff, and the perpetrator Sal Lami rose slowly into the air, as if he were being pulled by some invisible hoist. Milton could see that great telekinetic magic was at play here. It was impressive, but also rather disturbing to watch, as the prisoner's clothes were forcibly removed, and he was sent drifting around the arena for all to see.
Rodnox shook his head, the traces of a smile present at the corner of his mouth for the first time.
Oh, my sister, such a show-off.
Milton looked concerned. What is this? What about the mountain? Shouldn't we be putting a stop to that evil as soon as possible?
Quiet, Mintal,
spoke Rodnox.
The king speaks.
The king was indeed speaking.
For his misdeeds and felonies against Creas and her people, the offending Salivus will be strapped to the great rotisserie and turned till he is no more.
As the king said this, a metal contraption emerged from a slit in the side of the structure and extended over the great opening of the pit, forming a giant turning spit. Milton caught a glimpse of Spamley, seated in an alcove below the king, who looked close to tears as Salivus was sent floating towards the great spit. Strandell the Humiliator smiled wickedly as she ascended a plinth to the left of the great hole and waved her staff again, binding Salivus to the main beam of the spit with ethereal metal chains. The king turned his head to the skies.
Now, let the meat gods rain down their combined power upon him!
The heavens parted, and a heavy rain came down on the stadium, followed by a sudden bolt of lightning, which surged perfectly downwards into the deep hole. Seconds passed, and an inferno of red-hot flame erupted back out of the pit. Salivus writhed in his constraints, as Strandell turned the spit slowly with the powers of her magic staff. The crowd sat silently watching the affair, no cheering or applause, just an intense, unbroken appreciation. Milton looked around. What was this horrible ritual? Were they really all going to sit there while the poor man was cooked like a sideways doner kebab?
Conspirator Salivus, have you any last words before you are cooked alive?
Bellowed the king, offering a shred of mercy. Salivus cast a sour glare at the king as he was turned, the flames from the pit licking at his exposed flesh.
Fuck you,
he spat. The king sat down, grinning.
I thought so.
Suddenly, from the alcove above his father, Prince Spamley stood up defiantly, brandishing a small dagger high in the air. Everyone turned to look as his wavering voice cried out, "No longer will I be repressed! The burnt end has no mercy for the black-hearted!" The king arose in fury, and Rumpus and his guards attempted to get to the young man, but it was already too late. Spamley continued to speak. "While you continued in your barbaric, torturous ways, I opened the gates for our saviours. For Mince!" The crowd gasped in shock as the prince stuck the little dagger into his stomach and collapsed, falling over the arena wall and down into the endless burning hole below. The audience burst into pandemonium, standing up and panicking. Amongst the confusion, Milton saw several shadowy figures, dressed in light armour and black hooded cloaks, vault the walls to the Colosseum and make their way stealthily towards the spit. Their faces looked to be completely concealed by white breathing masks, with goggles and tubes attached.
"Terrorists! Defilers of the law! Stop them!"
bellowed the king, as his surrounding troop of soldiers ran forth, brandishing their curved halberds and spears. The masked men, however, had weapons of their own, and shot the guards down with arrows before they could get close. The infiltrators ran towards the centre of the arena, to the plinth where Strandell stood. With a quick wave of her grand staff, she sent many of the cloaked men flying screaming into the burning abyss, but one of them managed to bypass her and cut the chains restraining Salivus, who was lifted to safety by more masked men scaling the great spit. Milton stared in wonder. This was turning out to be quite the event indeed. The crowd around him was screaming and yelling, and heading for the arched exits. Milton heard a sudden loud thunk, and turned to see the body of Rodnox topple over the seat in front, a thick metal arrow lodged in the back of his head. Then he decided it was probably time for him to leave too, and scrambled across the rows of stone seats for an archway at the back. Down below, the Royal Guard, led by Rumpus, had slain a dozen of the masked infiltrators, yet had failed in preventing the group from carrying the charred and unconscious Salivus to the wall at the edge, where more of them began lifting him over.
"They are getting away!"
cried the king, withdrawing his own blade, a long thin greatsword that shone white as it reflected light from the thunderstorm above. The last thing Milton recalled seeing was one of the masked men driving a blade through the shoulder of Strandell the Humiliator, before a sack was thrust over his head, and he was plunged into darkness. When the bag was finally pulled off, and Milton opened his eyes, he saw that he was in a dimly lit cave. A single lantern hung from the earthen ceiling above him, with a moth-like creature circling it ceaselessly. All he knew was that he had been blindfolded for a long time, and that he had likely been transported by a dragon due to the exceptionally bumpy experience. Now he was tied to a cold metal chair, with absolutely no clue where he was. A figure stepped in front of his line of sight. Milton squinted, thinking he vaguely recognized the individual, a man who wore simple dark clothing and possessed long auburn hair that fell about his shoulders. He was tall and solemn-looking, with tired, sad eyes. Milton cleared his throat and accosted the man.
"What's going on? Why was I bagged? And why have you tied me up?"
The man responded.
"Before I untie you, I must ask you a few questions."
"Fine," said Milton rather angrily. The man didn't seem to pose much of a threat.
"Then I get to ask you a few questions of my own."
The man shrugged.
"Seems only fair. First, I must ask whether it was you who brought down the cargo ship on the port in the south."
Milton looked around shiftily.
Yeah. Why? Oh God, am I going to get into trouble?"
The man smiled slightly, shaking his head.
No, quite the opposite. You severed one of the capital's biggest trading routes right at the artery. The cargo freighter crashed and destroyed Port Pork without a single casualty, preventing it from completing its routine stock-up. The perfect disruption to the capital's economy. Now, I must ask you, who do you work for?
Milton put two and two together.
Okay, yeah, you guys are that group of terrorists, aren't you? What was it you called yourselves? Burns End?
Terrorists is what we have been labelled by the Crown. We prefer freedom fighters. And it's the Burnt End.
Burned End, whatever. No, I don't work for anyone. I'm a traveller, and I've come here to kill a demon, like I've said 101 times, but no one's listening to me, and now I've been locked up down here in a cave!
The man ignored Milton's complaining.
Mintal, it seems that we fight for the same side. The evil from the mountain is a common enemy, as is the monarchy. I have been undercover in the royal palace for some time now. Do you not recognise me?
Milton squinted his eyes.
Steward Rodnox?
The man shook his head.
No, not the Grand Steward. I am glad to say that he was slain by my own hands, for I was Grillian Harvestman. I posed as Rumpus's right-hand man.
Milton drew a blank.
No, sorry, I don't remember a Grillian.
You are sure of this? We met on the plains after saving you from the giant. I could immediately tell there was something special about you, so I ordered that our men rescue you as well as Salvus during the operation at Annihilation Hall. Alas, it cost us lives, but the deed is done.
Milton shook his head.
Nah, sorry, don't remember you.
In any case, my true name is Vorkan Knive. I am head of espionage here at the Burnt End.
Milton was suitably insulted.
Okay, Vulcan, if you knew I wasn't a baddie, then why'd you tie me up and bag me?
It was merely a precaution, for we did not know your true intentions, and for that I apologise.
Vorkan moved to untie Milton from the chair.
I implore you now, Mintal, join us, and fight for what is right.
Milton's hands were untied, and he stood up and stretched his legs. Behind him in the cave cell was a prison cell door leading into the cave corridor. Milton turned back to Vorkan, in a bid to assert dominance.
No, you listen to me. What we're going to do is go to the mountain and kill the demon that's inside, okay? I'll have no part in this little war that you're doing.
Vorkan hung his head.
Mintal, I'm afraid that you already do. The king will be searching for you, as you will be one of his prime suspects for the orchestration of the attack at Annihilation Hall. His youngest son, who will be remembered as a hero by us, is dead, and he thirsts for vengeance.
Milton put his hands on his hips defiantly.
All right, tell me now. What's so bad about the king, huh? Seemed to me like he have made delicious meals and keep everyone happy and full.
Vorkan shook his head.
It is not that simple, Mintal. King Karnus rules as a despot, a dictator. For many generations the populace of Creus has lived in his shadow of malevolence. It was he who sealed the gates between the 3 districts of the capital, segregating rich from poor and causing the schism in wealth to widen exponentially. Over 90% of the Kraos population live in poverty and slums around the edges, while the king and his dignitaries live in splendour, holding grand feasts at the expense of the common folk. Not to mention his ruinous colonization of other civilizations. He has enslaved entire races and peoples, disregarding the honour and morality that our ancient ancestors once built the old kingdom upon. This is what is so bad about the king.
Yeah, alright, fine. That is pretty bad, admitted Milton. So, where's this secret base we're in?
Vorkan opened the cell door and directed Milton out into a system of low-ceilinged underground tunnels.
This is our subterranean lair, a mile beneath the plains of Durnest country, near the uncharted regions. The Crown will not think to look here, so this is where we conduct our operations.
The tunnel opened out into a big, well-lit cavern, with a lot of official-looking business going on. Black-clothed Meat-Realm folk ran here and there, carrying documents and passing on messages, paying little to no attention to Milton as he walked past. The cavern itself was held up by huge metal pillars, with upper-level balconies branching between them.
This is epic! Yeah, like Secret Lair from James Bond!
Vorkan directed Milton to a raised metal platform up a small flight of steps. Over here is a man I'd like you to meet. Our director, in fact. A man of short, curly hair and average stature looked up from his business, talking to a group of white-robed folk in metal helmets. He, too, wore the same helmet, along with a wide, cheerful smile, a pleasant contrast to the sombre faces of his colleagues.
Ah, Vorkan, you're back. Is this our man?
Asked the director excitedly, approaching Milton to shake his hand enthusiastically.
I am Director Roni. I've heard a lot about you and what you've done for us, Mintle. A lot.
Wait, hold on. What did you say your name was? Asked Milton, still shaking the man's hand. The director laughed.
Well, Roni is actually my second name. My first name is Pepper.
No way, remarked Milton. Pepper Roni? Like from Lego Island? Are you the one to talk to about the mountain, then? Roni laughed, turning to Vorkan.
This guy's brilliant.
He turned back to Milton.
Sort of. Well, no. That would be our head of science, Chargrel Skulleater.
Roni leaned in close to Milton's ear.
Don't be put off by his name. He's a man of great intellect.
A towering, dark-skinned man, wearing long white robes and tiny circular spectacles, stepped forward, offering his big hand to shake.
Greetings, Mintal. May I start by quelling your suspicions? Yes, I am a beef-eater, and no, I will not consume your flesh.
Vorkan cut in. This was another lie invented by the king. The beef-eaters were wrongly depicted as a barbaric people of a cannibalistic nature when the king invaded their lands and enslaved them, burning their once great kingdom to the ground. Contrary to popular belief, their minds are by far the sharpest of any Meat-Realm denizen, and they are quite adverse to violence of any form. Milton looked up in awe of the proud man. You're like 8 foot tall. In the painting I saw, you look tiny. Chargrel laughed deeply.
The king only wishes he was taller than a beef-eater.
One of the white-robed people behind called the director, who turned back animatedly.
Okay, I've got to go. Lami's showing signs of life.
Milton watched as Roni ran to an operating table at the back of the cave, upon which lay the man who was to be executed, covered in severe-looking burns and very much unconscious. Did he really lead an attack on the city? Asked Milton. Yes, a daring endeavour against one of the main city watchtowers, an operation spearheaded by our previous director. Vorkan paused, lamenting the fact. The king's second-born son, a man of valour and heart matched by no man. What happened to him? Asked Milton, bemused. For the attack, the king's second-born son, under the alias Karnus, was banished via a portal to reality. I watched the entire thing unfold, for this was when I still acted as Rumpus's right-hand man. It took a month or so to recover from the loss of leadership, but Roni, the rebel prince's most trusted ally, makes a fine replacement. Reality? That's where I'm from. Maybe I've seen him walking round in a shop or something. Vorkan shook his head. Unlikely. Reality does not necessarily mean Earth. He may be anywhere in your vast, mostly empty... what do you call it? A universe. Let's not get caught up in the semantics here. Milton pointed at the hulking beefeater. You, big guy, tell me about the mountain.
As you wish. Follow me,
instructed Chargrel Skulleater. Milton and Vorkan followed the big man to a large metal door at the back of the cave.
Before we enter, you must wear these.
Chargrel offered protective masks, the same masks that the infiltrators of the execution had been wearing. Up close, they didn't look too different from a classic white World War I gas mask. Milton slipped it over his head and inhaled a strong, rubbery stench.
We have all of our men wear these as a precaution. You cannot be too careful.
Chargrel opened the doors, and they followed him through into a cluttered laboratory, filled with scientific equipment Milton could not explain, even if he spent the next 5 years there. There were walls of graphs and charts, and shelves of cluttered research equipment, including a rack of syringes filled with a green substance, and all manner of peculiar shrubs, housed in miniature green misted glass domes. Chargrel walked to a desk, bearing a series of glass beakers and burettes, which housed a lot of the same putrid green gas. He held up a large volumetric flask of the green haze, stopped fast with a cork.
This is the green fog. It is a dangerous artificially enhanced bioweapon of undetermined origin that infects via the respiratory system. It is highly infectious, though currently only among the giants of Karnus, though there is a high chance it will soon evolve.
Chargrel indicated numerous dissected creatures pinned to the table, the closest of which was a withered pink rodent.
I first found traces of the fog within the lungs of the ground-dwelling naked meat rat. Then a few days later, it had transmitted to its natural predator, the greater spotted treld.
Chargrel indicated a dead monkey-legged woolly bird.
Then, a matter of hours ago, Vorkan returns with isolated DNA of a Karnus giant, taken from the one felled in the plains.
Chargrel pointed towards a big glass cylinder, in which floated the severed big toe of a giant. Took a damn long time to cut that off, reminisced Vorkan. Chargrel adjusted his small circular glasses.
The green fog is evolving. The next stage is infection of meat kind.
Vorkan cut in. It is my thinking that the Kreas monarchy has manufactured this viral agent and plans to eke us out of hiding with it. Milton shook his head angrily. No, no, no! Listen to me. This is the work of the demon Krog. There is no other explanation. Milton grabbed a vial of the distilled green gel. I've seen this sort of stuff before. The colour. It's unmistakable. Krog is behind this. We've got to get to that mountain and put a stop to it. You speak that name again, said Vorkan, recounting his hearing of it when Milton was rescued. But we have never heard it.
The little man Mintol is correct. Destruction of the mountain is pertinent, which is why I have been developing this.
Chargrel moved over to a safe in the corner of the lab, where he entered a code and removed a complex-looking device that was all wires and circuits.
This is a remote-activated incendiary device with the capability to blow up the mountain from inside, thus destroying the green fog at its source. If Mintol is correct in assuming this is where the contamination originates.
Milton looked eagerly at the little machine. So it's a bomb?
In layman's terms, yes.
So all I have to do is get inside the mountain and set the timer off and it will blow up the mountain? Chargrel laughed, returning the bomb to its safe and locking it securely.
In theory, yes, but I regret to say it will not be you performing this task, but Vorkan here, our very own chief of espionage. He's the only man we can trust for the job.
No way! That's bullshit, voiced Milton. I know more about the mountain than him. I've been wanting to go there for ages! Vorkan put his hand on Milton's shoulder. This mission is dangerous. I may not return. We cannot risk your life as you are a valuable asset. You will remain here in the lab with Chargrel and apply your knowledge of this Krag. As Milton went to protest further, a loud raid siren sounded around the base. One of the white-robed people banged at the lab door. They're here! The King's army is here! Vorkan began to panic. No, not now! How did they find this base? I thought you said it was top secret, asked Milton. Chargrel Skulleater stooped to pick at something on Milton's back. Hey, what are you doing? Inquired Milton, shaking him off. He turned to see that the beefeater held something in his big dark hands, a little vibrating sphere of flesh that had begun to emit an ear-piercing frequency.
You were stuck with this,
said Chargrel. What's that? Asked Milton in horror. Vorkan interjected. It's a remote globoid sonar node, more commonly known as a meatball, a tracking device used by the king. Rumpus must have stuck you with it. Oh, God! Vorkan rushed to the door. You two stay here. The lab cannot be compromised.
Vorkan disappeared through the metal door, which he promptly bolted behind him. Milton ran up to the closed aperture and banged on it. "Hey, let me out! What the hell?"
You won't be able to leave now.
said Chargrel, who was fiddling with the meatball with a large screwdriver.
Once the safety of this base has been compromised, the lab will seal itself indefinitely as a precaution. I can't have the king finding out about my research.
Milton collapsed to the floor in front of the door.
Don't look so glum, little man. There's enough seed cakes down here to last us the better part of a year.
Chargrel finished fiddling with the little ball, and it ceased emitting its little whine.
Look, you can have this as a little keepsake.
He tossed the meat sphere at Milton, who caught it and cast it aside, where it rolled under a cabinet at the back of the lab.
"I'm sick of this place. No one listens to me. You burnt-end lot are just as bad as the monarchy. All you ever do is want to have a big war when there's an evil demon right next to you in a mountain."
Chargrel smiled knowingly.
I feel similarly. Hence why I am down here.
Milton stood up and peered through the little window in the door, where he saw people scurrying around and armoring up, grabbing metal bows and curved blades, as well as adorning their distinctive masks and black capes. When everyone else had left, he saw Director Roni on his knees next to the comatose body of Lami, as he pressed a button, causing a protective metal shield to slowly cover the bed on which he lay. Then he too geared up and ran to the exit. Milton was alone with the beefeater, who sat delicately pipetting green liquid from glass slides into a petri dish. Far above, muffled through the layers of sediment, Milton could hear the distant sounds of battle, but there was nothing he could do. He wondered if King Karnus and Rumpus were up there fighting, and how long it would be before they found him down here and arrested him, and personally threw him down the big fiery pit. He couldn't just sit idly by, waiting for that moment to come.
Hey, let me out of here and I'll, make it worth your while, bargained Milton.
Impossible. You have nothing I want,
responded Chargrel, without looking up from his work. Milton edged around behind him. I wouldn't be so sure. I've got a lot of things. Milton slowly moved around to the shelves, where he reached for the rack of green-filled syringes.
I doubt any of it would be of interest to me,
came Chargrel's monotone response. Milton gripped one of the syringes in his hand. Oh, I wouldn't be so certain. He charged forwards and plunged the green needle into the thick neck of the beefeater, who instantly began to writhe around in his seat, grabbing at Milton from behind with his thick arms. Green froth began to pour from the hole in his neck as Milton pressed the syringe further in. I'm sorry I had to do this, said Milton, struggling in the big man's grip. At last, the beefeater tired of struggling, and his head slumped backwards, a green goo oozing from his vacant eyes, visible through his mask. Milton was unsure what would happen next. He couldn't rule out the Kragian goo reanimating the beefeater in a similar way to the giant, so he had to act fast. He quickly searched the scientist's coat pockets and instantly scored a ring of about 10 keys. He ran to the metal door and began to shakily test them in the little lock. The first one was far too small, the second far too big. The third key, however, was the right one, and yielded success. The metal door swung open, and Milton pumped his fist. Yes! I don't need the bird to open doors for me. I can do it for myself. Milton rushed around the empty bottom floor of the base, the raid siren still whining loudly. He grabbed the last remaining black hooded cloak off of a peg and threw it over himself. He already had the gas mask, so now he appeared just as a normal burnt-end fighter, minus any of the much-needed protective armor. He removed his backpack and rooted around, pulling out and unsheathing his trusty pucker bayonet. About time you saw some action again. All ready to go, he headed for the staircase at the back of the base, then suddenly remembered something very important. Shit! Ah, the bomb! He turned and sprinted back into the lab and peered within. The body of Chargrel was still leant back in his chair, in the same position Milton had left it. Milton hurried past, making for the safe which housed the bomb. He bent down in front of it and stared at the panel of buttons on the front. Fuck, 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 fuck! Milton heard a gurgling noise from next to him, and cast a cursory glance to the beefeater's slumped body. No sign of any movement. It was probably just a noise from a jar or a vat or something. Milton mashed his fingers against the keypad, randomly testing combinations, but to no avail. Shit! He knew he would need this bomb. He could sense there would be no other way to put an end to the evils of the mountain. Finally, he gave in. Okay, bird. Guess I do need you. Blast this safe open! The bird triumphantly emerged from Milton's bag pocket, and got to lasering the door, a process that took longer than usual, likely due to the strong material the safe was made from. Milton looked around impatiently. "Come on, hurry up!" He glanced back at the scientist's body, and thought to catch a short, spasmodic movement, but quickly denounced it as his eyes playing tricks on him. There were a lot of fumes in here, after all. "How much longer?" moaned Milton, tapping his foot on the floor petulantly. A slow gargle came from the chair, and Milton turned in horror to see the beefeater visibly shift in his chair. Milton leapt back in fright. "Fuck! I've created a zombie! Bird, hurry up and get this thing open!" Chargrel Skulleater, now green-hued and a lot more likely to eat Milton's skull, rolled from his chair and began to crawl across the floor towards Milton, his mouth foaming with green cream. Milton brandished his pucker blade. "Stay back! I'm warning you!" The green zombie held out its hand and moaned. Milton saw that, much like a possessed giant of Karnus, Chargrel's eyes were no longer a deep black, but a luminescent green. Just as the zombified scientist moved to claw at Milton's leg, the bird completed blasting the safe door, and it swung open and fell from its hinges. Milton hastily snatched the bomb and tucked it under his arm, leaping over the crawling cadaver and making for the exit once more. He had escaped, but to what end? As he ascended the long metal staircase to his escape, he heard the unrelenting sounds of war raging on above. Who knew what the situation would be like above ground? After what seemed like an hour of climbing, Milton came to the top of the staircase, which appeared to be sealed off by a great slab of rock. He attempted to heave it out of the way, but it wouldn't budge. He was just about to give up and hurl himself back down the mile-long staircase when he clocked a small button on a wall to the right, slapping it promptly. A grating, grinding noise came from the big chunk of stone as it began to slowly shift aside. The evening light of the big red sun flooded the stairway, and Milton let his eyes adjust briefly. When he finally peered out through the rocky gap, he saw the remnants of a great battle. Hundreds of corpses lay bloodied, blasted and bruised in the mud, churned by great machines of war that stood broken and destroyed. He saw countless warriors of both sides dead in the mud, those silver-clad of the royal legions, and those black-hooded and masked of the burnt end. He saw the giant limp bodies of the big dragons he'd glimpsed in the royal armory, and hung his head. He'd have quite liked to see one of those in action. Milton stepped out onto the battlefield and walked among the dead, his shoes slopping through the mud and blood. He looked behind him. It seemed that the secret base was located underneath the sirloin-looking rock plateau he remembered flying over that very morning. Not so secret anymore. Milton wondered who had won the battle. There didn't look to be any survivors. He looked to the mountain, which lay just to the left, enshrouded in a green mist, no more than a few miles away. He clutched the bomb. It was time to put an end to this madness.
"Minto, over here,"
came a voice from behind, in an alcove in the side of the plateau. Milton spun around to see a small party of black-cloaked folk, survivors of the burnt end. His intrigue got the better of him, and he ran to the survivors, hopping over dead bodies and sometimes accidentally stepping on them, making a nasty crunching noise. When he got to the remaining warriors, he saw that Director Roni was among them, covered in blood and dirt, but still grinning widely.
We won!
The 7 other men and women surrounding him looked less enthusiastic. "Minto, you left. Is the lab safe?" came a hoarse voice from below. Milton looked down to see Vorkan, one of his legs missing. He also wore a bloodied cloth over his head, indicating perhaps the loss of an eyeball or some other facial feature. Milton hid the bomb from view beneath his cloak, even though he wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. Yeah. Chargrel told me to come up and check on you guys. Said he was worried. So, the research is safe. We can stop the infection. And the monarchy. Thank you, Minto. At last, I can die happy. Vorkan's body fell limp, and his comrades woefully covered him up with his torn black cape. Roni looked up at Milton.
The events of today have been regrettable, to say the least, and I have more than a fair share of blood on my hands. But I can say with pride that somewhere on this battleground, the king's firstborn, Rumpus, lies dead at the hands of the legendary Vorkan Knive. The battle may be won, but the war is not over. Next, to Creus, to kill the king.
Milton nodded. Yeah, for sure. Listen, man, I'm going to go to the mountain and blow it up with this bomb, if you don't mind. I don't know how big the explosion's going to be, so you might want to head back down into your bunker or something. Director Roni stood and put a hand on Milton's shoulder.
Mintal, thank you for your help. Your name shall be written in the Meat Realm history books, and you will always be an honorary member of the Burnt End.
Milton smiled politely and turned for the mountain as the limping patrol returned to the mouth of the underground base. He suddenly realized he had forgotten to alert them of the present condition of Chargrel, but it didn't really fancy walking back across all the bodies again to tell them. Milton trudged to the edge of the battlefield, past a collapsed trebuchet and a big dragon with no head. He looked up at the green mountain that continued to grow in size as he approached. Now would come the task of quelling whatever evil was within. He pressed on. If he walked fast, he could make it to the top before sundown. What Milton didn't see was the not-quite-dead Prince Rumpus wriggle out from beneath the broken trebuchet and stagger to his feet in pursuit, furious at the outcome of the battle, but fiercely determined to find out the motives of the mysterious traveller who called himself Mintal. The closer Milton got to the mountain, the more the air around him changed, slowly becoming thick with green mist and rather difficult to breathe. He was sure that if he took his mask off for even a second, he would become green and angry, like Chargrel or the giant. There was no path whatsoever, so Milton had to improvise, weaving around the dense pine trees as he climbed further upwards, the battlefield now a distant stain on the landscape below. There was no wildlife among the pines, as it had all fled the ominous green haze. There were, however, peculiar masses of some kind of green membrane. The spongy substance wrapped itself around trees like evil roots, and Milton could have sworn it was breathing. At times, Milton also thought he saw a figure behind him, hiding behind trees and boulders, but dismissed it as a trick of the light. At last, he came to a cavernous opening in the mountainside, the entryway lined with the gross green roots. The atmosphere was fast becoming an unnavigable green haze, and he couldn't see 3 feet in front of him. Yet he walked right into the hole, and kept walking, until he could see nothing but green. That's when the idea hit him. The chalice! Milton flipped his backpack around on one strap, and pulled out his favourite transparent goblet. He held the glass forth, and sure enough, the green aura dispelled around him, as if repulsed by the radiant artifact. Milton continued down the cave, with the chalice held in front of him, acting like a cool magic lantern. The passageway seemed to be heading gradually downwards on a perfect diagonal gradient, and the walls of the tunnel seemed freshly hewn, covered with the root-like green tendrils. The further Milton walked, the more he could hear a bassy droning noise, like the hum of an AC or portable generator. The passage itself was beginning to take on peculiar attributes, the walls slowly shifting and pulsing around him. Was the mountain alive? There were big green throbbing veins protruding from the rock walls that Milton daren't touch. Suddenly, the passage opened out dramatically into a big excavated hollow that Milton guessed to be the very heart of the mountain. In the middle of this concave hole was a giant floating membranous globe. Green tentacles of goop lashed themselves to it, as if they were anchoring it to the floor. The disgusting green glob was beating like an organ, and covered in horrifying black veins that made Milton want to sick up in his mouth. The big evil ball was about the size of the passage Milton had come through, and he quickly gathered that this was the sphere's entry point, as if it had been shot at an angle into the mountain. Milton walked up to the loathsome mucousy muscle.
Right, you horrible round thing! What business do you have here?
There came no answer, so he slashed at one of the thin tendrils attaching itself to the ball, but it regrew almost instantly, like some aberrant sticky vine. He shrugged and set down the time bomb from under his arm.
If you're going to play all hard to get, then I'll just blow you up.
Milton fiddled with the explosive device for a few moments until it beeped a couple of times and displayed a timer set at 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Easy.
Yeah, I'll be out of this horrid place in 4.5. He turned, eager to leave the unsightly, cursed cavern, but someone stood at the mouth of the passageway. Someone he really didn't want to be seeing right about now.
Minto! At last we meet again,
grinned Prince Rumpus Mannaham, looking a tad rough around the edges from his great battle, and wearing a pilfered burnt-end gas mask. His once silver armour was tarnished, and had fallen away completely in places, opening his midriff and left shoulder to attacks. Milton's voice echoed around the hollow. "You're alive? I thought Vorkan killed you." Rumpus spat at the ground.
That pathetic traitor! He couldn't kill a Fenazine with both eyes open. I always suspected he would betray me.
Rumpus looked around the cavern in disgust.
What is this place? Is this where you come from?
He unsheathed his curved silver sword and waved it at the big green glob.
Is this who you serve?
Milton held forth his dagger. "Of course not. Milton serves no one." Rumpus narrowed his eyes.
So, it is Milton, is it? So first you lie to my father, and then you lie about your name. I should have left you for the giant, you double-crossing miscreant.
Rumpus lunged forth with a jab from his blade, and Milton parried. Luckily, Rumpus was weak and sloppy from battle, and Milton managed to land an onslaught of swings and slices, one of which lacerated Rumpus's exposed stomach, which had him bent double in pain. Looks like you're the liar, Sire Rumpus. You said you bleed mincemeat if I cut you open, but it looks more like a thin gravy." Rumpus clutched at his wound, as his brown Carnisapian blood dripped onto the cave floor. "Shut up!" screamed the prince, surging forward at Milton, fueled with unbridled rage. He swung hard, knocking Milton's bayonet from his hands and forcing him onto the floor, the tip of the jagged sword nearly pricking his neck.
You remind me of my traitorous brother. He too could have been so much more, yet he chose to waste his time among petty thieves and turncoats in some sordid underground hideaway. You have the same look in your eyes as he did. It's a shame you and he will never meet, as you will die on this day, traitor Mintol.
Milton sneaked a peek at the time bomb, which lay a few feet away and read 4 minutes and 10 seconds. Milton swallowed hard, the tip of Rumpus's sword prodding his Adam's apple. Maybe he could hedge for time and the bomb would go off. But what then? He'd be reduced to smithereens. That was no way to go out. Rumpus stood over him, continuing his monologue.
I know what it is you hold in your hand, Milton. You bear the keystone of the Pucker realm, an item my father has long since been seeking for his collection. Once I kill you, I shall pry it from your cold, dead hands and seal it deep within the royal vaults.
3 minutes 49. Milton played along with the threat. No, you couldn't. You wouldn't do that. Rumpus laughed maniacally.
Oh, yes, I would. Soon the entire royal collection shall be mine, once I have gotten that old fool off the throne. Then, when King Rumpus is the ruler of Creus, there will be no revolutions, no rebellions. All will bow down to me, or be sent to purgatory.
Rumpus laughed again and drew back his sword, ready to end Milton. An idea quickly came to Milton, who put on his best pleading act. No! Rumpus! Please don't take off your mask and absorb the great Kragian power! Please! Rumpus looked insulted.
Do you take me for a fool? The air in here is highly noxious. I will become mad in seconds.
Rumpus turned his attention to the green ball, his sword still pinned on Milton, though with far less pressure.
This is what you sought to destroy? I have read of these in ancient tomes, infected asteroids used in great wars of old. If only it could be harnessed, controlled.
While Rumpus's guard was down, Milton swatted the silver sword aside and rolled out from under Rumpus, jumping to his feet and grabbing his bayonet in one quick move. The time bomb read 2 minutes 54. Ample time to finish this. Rumpus paid little heed to Milton's escape from his capture, and instead walked slowly towards the green ball.
You should not have led me here, Milton. This is power like I have never seen. Power of the mythical Krag you speak of. If only there was some way to capture its essence.
Inspired by the Halo 3 cutscene where the Prophet of Truth is infected by the Grave Mind, Milton snuck up behind Rumpus, much like he had with poor Chargrel, and pounced, this time slicing at the tube attached to the breathing mask as Rumpus turned to block the attack. The mask was rended in twain and fell from Rumpus's face. The evil prince attempted to hold his breath, but the green mist quickly entered his lungs, pouring into his nose and mouth. His eyes began to water as the Kragian fog took hold of him, reaching forward for Milton with his shaking hands. Milton stood back as green pustules began to erupt from the man's body, his eyes slowly turning green as the Kragian rage came about him. Milton wondered how many more times he'd have to watch this today. The bomb read 2 minutes exactly. If he ran as fast as he could, he would probably just make it out of the passageway into safety with seconds to spare. He cast a glance back to the giant pulsing Kragian organ, then legged it back up into the tunnel, where he could just about make out a circle of natural light at the end. Milton ran up that tunnel until he felt like his heart was in his mouth, but he wasn't the only one running, for behind him was the infected Rumpus, still giving chase.
"Give me the chalice, Milton,"
yelled the green Rumpus in a nasty, guttural voice. Milton couldn't tell whether it was the prince talking to him or the green Kragball using him as a vessel. Either way, he didn't want to turn around and strike up a conversation. Milton had been counting down in his head, and he knew that the bomb would go off any second now. As he ran for dear life, he found himself wishing that he'd just gone straight to the mountain to begin with, instead of messing around with all these bloody meat people. Sure, he wouldn't have got the bomb, but he would have figured something out. Next time he would only listen to one person, and that would be himself. Far behind him, he heard the booming sound of a huge explosion, and within seconds he felt a great heat against his back as he was thrust forward and propelled from the cave's mouth, rocketing through the air surrounded by huge flying chunks of rock and green ooze. He was soaring through the air! This was fantastic! The bird's shimmering shield of protection flickered into action as the land rushed by underneath. As he flew, he saw the green blur of pine trees below him and glowing green fragments of the desecrated Rumpus all around him. Then he felt the cold shock of water all over him. Then he felt nothing. Milton turned over onto his side and nestled into his pillow. He was warm and safe in his bed at home. He opened his eyes to see the light of dawn peek through his curtains. Had the whole thing been a horrid nightmare? He looked down at himself. He was clean, dry, wearing his skeleton onesie, and clutching his favourite Totodile and Blastoise Pokemon plushies. There was no smell of meat, and no searing pain. At last, he was home and safe. The chalice stood shining on his desk, next to his trusty PC, just like it had on the morning he'd left for Dartmoor all those weeks ago. He lay back down and closed his eyes. It had all been a dream after all. There came a sharp knock on his bedroom door. "Milton, are you decent?" The round face of Jamie Oliver promptly slid through the doorframe. "I heard you stirring. Are you okay, Milton?" Milton sat up as his bedroom light was turned on, illuminating the untidy living space.
"Dad? What's going on?" Milton saw the Meat Realm gas mask and hooded black cloak neatly folded next to the chalice on his desk. His heart sank. So it had all been real. "What happened? What day is it?" Jamie entered the room, wearing his classic big blue cardigan.
"It's Saturday, July the 25th. You've been out for nearly 2 weeks, Milton."
Milton rubbed his eyes. "What?" Jamie sat down at the end of Milton's bed.
"We found you floating in a pond after you blew up the mountain. Impressive work with that, by the way. That was a rogue Kragian comet carrying an ancient evil virus. Haven't seen one of those since the Bodiscalier Wars. Must have gotten lost between realms or something. Anyway, got breakfast on the go downstairs. Martinez monkey omelette, your favourite. Oh, and a letter came for you."
Jamie indicated an envelope on Milton's desk. He patted Milton on the leg.
"See you downstairs when you're ready."
Jamie stood and exited the cluttered room. Milton yawned and threw the duvet off of himself. His limbs were aching and stiff from being in bed for so long, but he got to his feet and walked to his desk where the letter lay. Milton stretched and picked it up, turning over the white paper envelope in his hands. His eyes quickly lit up, when he saw who it was from. On the front, in a scrawled handwritten attempt at cursive, was written,
To Milton, from Barry Podmore.
This episode of Milton's Adventure, a Milton story, was brought to you by the wonderful folks over at Lindor Chocolate, the smooth, velvety choc with a hell of a lot of stock. You could buy it, you could eat it, you can do anything that you really could do with any other chocolate, and then some. Phew, luxury, smooth chocolate. Delicious, velvety taste, with that superior brown inflection on the top of your tongue. Amazing, truly beautiful. This is the chocolate for me, and I can assure you, the chocolate for you as well, and maybe your whole family too. Look at this kangaroo bounding across a field, and then remember that soon you shall be listening to the next exciting episode of Milton's Adventure, a Milton Craft story, narrated by Ed Pawncroft.
Fuck you. 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 Fuck off!